Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As was introduced, I am Jeong Yeong-hyeon, professor at Pusan National University. So, Pukyong History Research Center is not part of actually Pukyong National University. I'm currently the research head of that center. I also study Wegu, or the Japanese pirates, just like Professor Young, who just delivered his presentation. And because of that, from research point of view, although I was not able to meet Professor Lee that often, actually was able to receive a lot of support from Professor Lee. And when I was asked to make a presentation on Korean pirates, I was a bit surprised because I thought that perhaps related to, as Professor Lee Young, I think that given all the circumstances, the birth of Korean pirates were not that feasible. But anyways, because I had some study materials ready, I decided to accept the offer and make a presentation on Korean pirates. I think that the time allotted for this presentation, it is not enough to talk about Korean pirates, so I thought that perhaps I can use this time to make a brief introduction on Korean pirates. For content developers, I think that the theme of Korean pirates may be quite new, and therefore I think that this can be an introductory session on Korean pirates. So I don't have a separate table of contents. However, I'm going to talk about Korean pirates, first of all. Not much is known about Korean pirates. As Professor Lee mentioned, there's rarely any content that talks about Korean pirates. And if you look at other countries or elsewhere, this topic of Korean pirates were not really dealt with. So does it mean that we didn't have any Korean pirates? No, we did. However, the size of Korean pirates was very small. So it was not that it was non-existent, but the numbers were very limited, and so I'd like to talk to you about why. So first off, I thought that it would be useful to define Korean pirates. So this is my own definition. Korean pirates or pirates would be a maritime group that engages in illegal activities to make profits in the oceans. So I know that this can be a very broad definition. You can either be smuggling or you can be engaging in violent activities, so trafficking. So all those can be the activities of piracy. And as Professor Lee mentioned, we also have Japanese pirates or wegu, and also Chinese pirates. And those were also deeply engaged in trafficking, smuggling as well. So I thought that those activities can also be included in the scope of piracy. So if you read here, their place of action would be out in the waters, and they would go beyond the scope of regulations and engaged in illegal activities. So they may consider that they are engaging in legit commercial activities, but since they don't pay any taxes to the relevant authorities, it would be, from the state's point of view, illegal action. And sometimes they would raid overseas vessels. And in the booklet, I had Princess Lakes anyways. Sometimes these pirates would raid other vessels and then share that confiscated assets with the state authorities. Now, I would like to talk about Korean pirates. Now, how are we going to define Korean pirates? So they can be pirates that actually were engaged in piracy in the waters of the Korean Peninsula. But there were other pirates, Japanese and Chinese pirates, who also were involved in piracy in the waters off the Korean Peninsula. So that would not qualify as a right or correct definition. So I thought that Koreans who engage in piracy activities would be Korean pirates. And if you look at many movies like 동방불패 and the Pirates of the Caribbean is here, I think that we really have to look at the actor to classify the pirates as either Korean pirates or non-Korean pirates. And as I mentioned earlier, there's really thin record of Korean pirates, and compared to Japanese or Chinese pirates, it's close to non-existent. And if you look at our historical documents, they are not recorded as pirates, but rather as water thieves. So Korean pirates would often described as water thieves. So they would be oftentimes described as maritime groups engaging in illegal activities, but sometimes in some academic research and studies, they would sometimes be described as somebody who would deserve our compassion and sympathy. So now I'd like to move on and talk about the history of Korean pirates. So here you can see the unified Shilla dynasty, and they would often call the thieves of the Shilla dynasty. Under the unified Shilla dynasty era, they did exist. However, if you look at Korean historical documents, they're not really described. However, if you look at Japanese historical documents, there are sometimes descriptions about those Korean pirates from the Shilla dynasty. They either say that pirates from the Shilla dynasty raided the country, and etc. So only in Japanese historical documents, Korean pirates would emerge. And we also talked about Jang Bo-go. He was actually with the Tang Dynasty military, but later returns to Shilla in 828, and he was at the forefront of combating pirates. And of course, pirates would include not just Korean pirates, but Chinese and Japanese pirates. And Jeong Yeong-hyeon actually collapses after Jang Bo-go dies. So afterwards, probably after his death, piracy probably exploded again. And at that point in time, after the return of Jang Bo-go, he was designated as the ambassador for Jeong Hae-jin. But if that was not the case, then I believe that Shilla dynasty perhaps could have considered him as a pirate. After the collapse of Jeong Hae-jin, the remaining groups or the forces moved to what is now known as Kim-hae or Kim-jae, and the remainders of Jeong Hae-jin were no different from pirates. So I wouldn't say that Jang Bo-go equals pirates. However, the line separating between the Jang Bo-go and pirates was very thin. Next, I'd like to talk about the post-Baekje era. Here we have Gotaji. I think that amongst the characters that I would talk about, I think that he this kotaji would be very useful as a subject of content development. Kotaji is also, I believe, a soldier from Shilla dynasty, and he originally was moving to China, but because of a typhoon, he gets separated, and there was some conflicts. And in the waters, he would help this war dragon and grateful. The water dragon would present his daughter to this kotaji. So this is a myth. So what is now known as Jindo would be the area of the background of this story. And that's when the Baekje and post-Baekje would be located in. So in Jindo and the nearby area, we can tell from this myth that there were probably many Korean pirates. And Neungchang, I believe, is most well-known Korean pirate from that era. Again, he used to work in the area of Naju, and he was a strategist and also a captain. And he would report to Kyonhwan. And after Wangwan gets defeated, Kunye would take control in the southwestern part of Korea, and Wanggon actually defeats Neungchang afterwards. So Taejo Wanggon was a soap opera that was really popular about 20 years ago, and this snippet is from that soap opera. And Neungchang actually appears in that soap opera. And also in Koje Island, there was a group of maritime groups called Chwasong. And next, I'd like to talk about Sambyulcho. I'm sure you also have some insight into Sambyulcho. So the Yuan dynasty wanted to defeat Sambyulcho, and Sambyulcho actually resists. And in the Southern Ocean, there was a lot of raiding and looting done. So from Korea's point of view, or Goryeo point of view, I believe that Sambyulcho could have been considered as Korean pirates. And also, if you look at the end of Goryeo, there were a lot of Japanese pirates raiding the country, and we started to have a group called Kawe, or fake Japanese pirates. They were not really Japanese pirates, and they were thieves working on shore, and therefore they were self-promoting as Japanese pirates, but they were not. And if you look at a historical document called Wonsa, it says that in the latter part of Korea era, these groups of people or groups raided Japan. So obviously, we can question and we can think about whether or not they were powerful enough to even raid Japan. But at that time, the Japanese people could have stolen the clothing of the Korean people and then fake themselves as Korean pirates. Anyways, let's move on and talk about Jangalme. And Jangalme is also described as Korean pirates in the Joseon dynasty. And obviously, this person and his group was very controversial between Joseon and China at that time. And water thieves. During the Joseon dynasty, these are recorded as Korean pirates, especially under the era of Seongjong, King Seongjong. You can see that they are often recorded in the historical textbooks. So they are described as water thieves and from the records, we can tell that clear descriptions or distinctions was made between the water thieves and also the Japanese pirates. So we can assume this time around that they were probably Korean pirates. And Jeju and people of Jeju, the fishermen from Jeju, were also sometimes engaged in piracy. So Pojak and also water thieves that were active back in that time. We are not yet sure whether or not these Pojak inns were the water thieves. However, we can only assume that some would have engaged in robberies or piracy activities. Now, in order to be called as pirates, we have to see whether or not they were active out in the waters. And I think that in order to have pirates active, we have to have relatively weaker central government command. So given that, we can see that most of the pirates that we have in our records show that they were active when the central government was quite weak. After the collapse and fall of Sambyulcho, we can see that there is not really any distinctive Korean pirate that was active. Also, after the Ming Dynasty was introduced and came into power, most of the transactions were actually done over land, and so there was little opportunity available for the pirates. And Joseon Dynasty also put together a strong navy force, and therefore I believe that the maritime groups and forces were not actually that active. But from time to time, when the conditions were met, there were, although limited in numbers, Korean pirates. Thank you.